I am using my points of reviewing each book as my own opinion for the purpose of commentary. In addition, this is intended for educational and informational purposes, and I do not claim ownership over the original work. Thank you. Welcome back to reading the Letters of Marsilio Ficino. We're on letter 3, which is titled The Bond Between Philosophy and the Law, the Happiness and Nobility of the Philosopher. He starts off his letter talking about his expertise as a philosopher. Not as a lawyer. He's making that distinction that many of his friends are lawyers, and he is a philosopher. And he's asking how the law is related to philosophy. Now he says Jupiter, the author of the laws, and how he's mentioning the connection to Saturn, who guides philosophy. Marsilio Ficino being an astronomer, and I would say a master of the occult, and I mean the more literal understanding, hidden. He likes to study what is hidden and find the knowledge behind that veil that most people keep before their eyes and their heart. Ficino, he sees the planets more than just physical bodies in the sky. He sees them as symbols for humanity. He sees them as religious ideas, not just scientific matter, but both matter and spirit. And that's why he can attribute human characteristics to planets. And I think when it comes to planets such as Saturn and Jupiter, I should have my own discussions on those subjects, because my knowledge is very limited, but I do know Saturn is a symbol for work, law, and order. So if I look now at the symbol of Saturn, now the esoteric symbol for Saturn, it looks like a cross with a hook to the right of it. The cross symbolizing the horizontal material reality and the vertical transcendental reality of the higher forms, and the hook on the side of this cross, which is the esoteric symbol for Saturn, represents work or the law. So this symbol alone shows how law works in with our physical world, and how the law in the physical world also works with the transcendental world. We need symbols to understand this. We also need philosophy. Okay, we're on halfway through the first page of the third letter of Marsilio Ficino. If you're going to be a philosopher, I think you also need to understand math. Because if you're not measuring what you're learning, you have no idea if you are progressing, staying the same, or getting worse. When you measure, you're able to track, and you cannot measure without mathematics. And part of astronomy, you're measuring different points in space, And if you're not organized with measurements, your philosophy will be off. He mentions how Homer talks a lot about Jupiter and Saturn and the laws from Jupiter. Going back to this esoteric idea, as above, so below. The planets, in theory, have the laws. The planet is a big body. That big body is constituted by certain conditional laws. These conditional laws are studied by human beings who are below the planets. As above the conditional laws of the planet, so below the humans will create their own laws according to what they see in the sky. Now Ficino is stumping my mind again with this idea of how can we establish someone as wise? Do you need wisdom to recognize wisdom? That gives me this problem of how are the blind to see? And if a wise man sees and everyone else is blind, how can we recognize him as wise if we are blind? This is a problem and it's a mystery. Ficino is highlighting this, but I could be misinterpreting it. And this is what I arrive from when he says something as, who's worthy of veneration? Now, the Stoics assert philosophers are immoral or immortal, not immoral. They're immortal. Now, the philosophers and the Stoics have a close relationship. I don't think you can have Stoicism without philosophy. And Stoicism is a subject or a niche within philosophy. The Stoics, probably most of them are well read in the Republic of Plato. The Republic of Plato thinks philosophers should run society, not a president, not a monarchy, not a theocracy, but philosophers. Stoics recognize philosophers as being the ones worthy to authority. Ficino is finishing this third letter talking about light and the splendor. Seems somewhat aligned with a prophet or a guru, like in a Sikh tradition, someone who's enlightened what kind of light they shine. And when he's talking about a light, I think this is a fascinating concept because when you think of a computer, the computer language is binary, the zeros and ones, and it's simply turning on and off electrons, energy. So you're constantly turning light on and off in different sequences. Those different sequences will give you different pixels. Those different pixels, more or less, will give you the image you see on your computer. My point is, light is important. I need to study light, the eyes, and color, because I have a theory that there is no such thing as color. There's only light. There's different shades of light. That's what gives you the illusion of color. And I base this off this idea of the computer, the binary code, and philosophy. Again, back to this idea of the sun and the stars and the planets, it relating to light. Not every planet has light in the same scale. The moon reflects the light from the sun, but the moon still gives off light. And it's different degrees of light. Same with humanity. Now, Ficino is bringing this abstract talk about planets and the light. He brings it back down to your everyday experiences. Some people are angry. They have a darker spirit, a darker personality. You can see it in their face. Their eyes are looking down. Their bodies are pointed down. Versus someone who has light. They're looking up. Their eyes are open. They're awake. Again, the sun is consciousness. And people are moved by different energies, or you could say different planets, or different spirits. If you're moved by the sun, you have that same radiant light, almost as the moon reflects the light from the sun. You can reflect the light from the sun yourself simply by just existing. You can have that light. As soon as you try your own way outside of this world of form, as Plato says, this idea of philosophy, you don't need to be in this world of philosophy. If you're not in this world of philosophy, it's hard to understand the world, because the philosophy frames the world. And by framing the world, I mean it instructs you. It tells you what to do next. The human has an incredible ability to rationally think. I want to study astrology more. The spirit or the soul of a planet. Do planets have souls? Are planets conscious? Do they have free will? Now, I want to make a distinction between the planets and the humans. Humans have free will. Regardless of whatever religion you may subscribe to or you are interested in, these are all universal principles. Yes, many people say, I don't like the philosophy language. It's too flowery. It's empty talk. It's word salad. But I'll make the argument that philosophy, like any subject that someone is elementary in, it's not going to make sense for you if you have an elementary understanding of philosophy. First grader probably won't understand algebra. You have to start with addition and subtraction, the basics of mathematics, before you get into the more difficult material. Same with philosophy. Hopefully this will be a great introduction for those who are somewhat interested in philosophy. I'm going to hammer this point, why you need philosophy. Passion will be a very big subject for these letters, especially for young people. Young people are very passionate. So the question is, what do you do with that passion? The answer in philosophy is philosophy. You need to understand philosophy to handle your passions. Similar to the idea of Aristotle, you have different drives. Some are focused more in your stomach. This is somewhat aligned. I'm not trying to be too synchronistic, but with chakras in the Eastern traditions, different parts of your body contain different energies. Your stomach, that part of your body desires food, like different from your head, different from different areas in your body that have different desires. Lust. So when you have these kind of desires, if you orient it towards truth, goodness, and beauty, you're going to better understand what to do with that passion. If you have a passion of anger, it's going to do you well to study Mars, to study the different planets of passion versus the more romantic types, which people attribute to Venus, the planet of love and passion. Look at what you are drawn to. If you're drawn to anger, look at the planet that associated with anger. If you're drawn to passion of lust, look at the planet that is associated with love and lust, and understand these ideas that govern the planets, and it's going to transfer to how you govern yourself. When you look at the images of the guru or the images of the saint, I'm almost done. I'm going to finish with this. You have the halo around the head. The halo around the head of the images of a enlightened guru or a saint figure is a symbol of governance. This person, he or she, has full governance of the self. They're able to dissolve the ego. They're able to see universal forms. They're enlightened. So keep that in mind. Philosophy is very important for us. You can study the planets and you can study yourself. Now that was the conclusion for letter 3, the Letters of Marsilio. It was a shorter letter, but it caused me to really think deep about these ideas of personality, desire, passion, and the planets. There's so much to learn about this. And this is only the 3rd letter. We're on the 4th letter now, which is titled, Why I Keep Coming Back to the Same Ancient Themes. So it seems to be perennialist. Now I see Marsilio being a priest in the Renaissance time. I had to remind myself of the context of Marsilio's writing. I haven't dived deep into his context because it is so deep already. I will just mention he's in the Catholic Church at the time of the Arab conquest of the West. Arab Empire coming from the East, starting in Saudi Arabia, Mecca, where the Prophet Muhammad was claimed to be born and to receive his revelation. that Arab empire, the Islamic empire, or the Islamic Golden Age, is spreading now to Europe. It's now the topic in Florence. It is now the topic in Europe. And Christians are... they are on edge with the Arab encroaching into the land of Europe and taking a lot of territory and killing people. So this was the time during the Catholic Church calling the church leaders or the bishops all around the world, mostly in Europe at the time, to address this problem of the Arabs. And Ficino is obviously aware of all of this. He doesn't mention it in his letters so far, but I want to lay down that foundation of Renaissance Europe, the Catholic Church, dominant institution, starting to slowly lose that influence. This is what we're writing about. This is what we're reading about. That's a brief context of what we're reading. He mentions how Saturn rising Aquarius is significant, and it has to do with this idea of perennialism and returning to the same ideas. And he's saying how the first time Saturn returned to Aquarius was the time he translated Plato. He thinks that is significant. You can see how Ficino is not an armchair philosopher. He is a philosopher. He believes the planets influence humans. And from that belief, he then constructs his behavior. He writes according to Saturn and its constellation. I'm really struggling with this fourth letter. That's why I haven't said much about it. I'm more than halfway through on the second page, but he is talking a lot about Plato. He's talking about Saturn and the different zodiacs. And I'm struggling with understanding this because I'm not very well read on astrology. And again, he's making relationships between people in his real life and planets, and how planets have relationship with each other, and how we humans have relationship with each other. There's an interesting idea. It's not the planets itself, but the space between the planets, which is worthy of emphasis. I think that's interesting because humans itself may not be interesting. Human space between other humans is far more interesting. In other words, know thyself. Step 1. Step 2, know the people around you. If I were to make any criticism of Plato, how dare I say that? I feel weird even saying that. If I were to make any criticism of Plato, it would be focus more on people, because he understands know thyself, but he doesn't understand the next step. In my humble opinion, I would have liked Plato to write more about relationship between other people, community, wisdom communities, group rituals. This is something I don't see too much about Plato. I'm very beginner in philosophy, so maybe I haven't read. But that's one thing I would say. And now he's talking about how the authority of the Medici, just mentioning the name Medici is interesting because I think the number one criticism of Catholicism that started to break Catholicism and initiating the Protestant Reformation was this family, the Medici family. I'm not targeting one family, but the Medici family is a great example. Great example of what? Of economic and institutional dominance of the Catholic Church. Now, many people saw this economic as the Medici family owning most of the land in Europe. So now you have the economic influence, and then you have the institutional influence. At the time, Latin, more or less the lingua franca of Europe. The scriptures were all in Latin. We did not have the translation in Europe of any Bible other than Latin until Luther started to translate the Latin into German. But this idea of the Medicis having too much money and having too much control of the scripture and the language of the scripture, this was the number one criticism of the Catholic Church at the time, in my opinion. So Ficino mentioning this, he's not blind to the influence of the Medici. He's not blind to the influence of the Catholic Church. And he's not blind to this institutional and economic influence of the Medicis through the Catholic Church is slowly deteriorating. And it's through powers such as the Arab conquest, Freemasonic central banking, now I know some of you are going to go, yes, but the Freemason was founded in 1700s during the American and English and French Revolution period. Yes, more or less, that is when it officially was founded, the 1700s, Freemasonry. And I would say this anti-Medici spirit. But before the 1700s, certainly there was this influence lingering and stirring in the corners of Catholic Europe. So I'll finish with saying how interesting to talk about these abstract ideas like planets and constellations to now institutional analysis of the Catholic Church, of banking, of law and governance. I know this chapter was on law and governance, but we didn't talk much about that. We probably will more on the next letter. So to tie this all together, you have abstract, universal symbols that all people respond to. And then you have the institution that maintains and holds these symbols. And then you have the output. What institution provides the best output? We know output meaning result of society, the overall well-being, economic and religious and personal status of a nation. This all has to do with symbols, institutions, and the laws that are established through these symbols and institutions. We'll continue later. Thank you for listening.